Imagine if there were 5 short licks that you can already play that would make your solo sound 10 times better. Now, if you're trying to play solos that sound more like jazz, then you probably run into this problem. You can play an arpeggio. You can also play a scale. And you can put it together to a lick that fits the chords, but it just doesn't sound right, even though the notes are all perfect and correct. Now what? Let me show you. This is about rhythm, even with examples like this that are all eighth notes, and you need the right melody to get the right rhythm. It also turns out that another major part of it is, surprisingly enough, technique. I have to admit that I wish my teachers had given me licks like these when I was just starting out. That would have made learning phrasing so much easier. The first lick that I wanted to use is just the first half of the bar, which is really just an E-7 arpeggio. And you can play any arpeggio like this. It will always sound great. Here's a G7 arpeggio with a resolution. Or maybe a C6 arpeggio, doesn't really matter. It's just a way to play an arpeggio. It's lazy and clearly doesn't take a lot of work, but it's very effective. Notice that you use legato technique, the pull-off, and this exact melody to get an accent on the second note of the arpeggio, which makes it pop and sound a lot better. And that's a part of getting your solos to sound like jazz. You want to have high notes on offbeats that get an accent. In the beginning, when you're just learning arpeggios and soloing, then you probably end up sounding like this. And I'm sure you can tell how that's kind of heavy, but adding this way of playing arpeggios to your solos can really lighten that up. Let's use it on a complete 2-5-1 just to hear it in action. And I'm using it in 2 places, but the last one is also making a variation of the rhythm. For me, a few clear examples like this and some guidance on how to phrase them, plus maybe some green solos as homework, could have done a lot for my phrasing early on. But don't get me wrong, I am very grateful for what I learned from my teachers. It's just that this one thing wasn't really there. Let's go on to another similar trick that's even easier to play. It's about having that high note on an offbeat, which you can then give an accent. Here's the second lazy way to do that. It's super simple. I'm using an F-7 arpeggio. I'm playing this one with legato as well, but you don't actually have to. In a way, I think it's funny that this is about using that a pull-off is just naturally softer than a picked note. So we pick the note on the offbeat and then the technique makes the following note softer, which makes the phrasing better. Now for me, that's kind of the opposite of what I try to achieve with legato playing, since I always try to get everything as even as possible. This lick is really easy to use and gives your lines a very smooth, natural flow. I'm using the F-7 arpeggio over a D-7 chord, so the arpeggio from the third. Let me just quickly explain the arpeggio from the third, because that's a very powerful concept that you anyway want to know. If you look at the chords in a 2-5-1, so D-7, G7 to C-7, then you have these notes. Now, the diatonic chords in C major would be this row of chords. And for each of the chords in the 2-5, if we take the chord that's a third higher, then you can see how the notes are actually the same, except we're just adding a ninth to each of them. And that's just a nice color on all of those chords, and that's why those arpeggios work. Notice that I'm using a pull-off to really give the chromatic note on the G7 an accent as well. This arpeggio building block is also great for moving from one chord to the next, which makes it very easy to use in a lot of songs. Check out how the B half diminished arpeggio resolves to C-7 in the next example, and also how I'm using the A-7 arpeggio over the D-7 chord to add dynamics to that bar. Let me know how you feel about this in the comments, but for me, just being aware of it already started to fix a lot of heavy phrasing in my playing and made me able to hear it much more clearly when I was listening to solos, which is maybe just as important. Lazy learning is just always a bonus. Let's explore some triad tricks. Start with a basic triad like this D minor triad. Now let's make that sound 100 times more like a jazz lick. And if you play that, then this next part almost naturally falls out of your hands. And here you have the same phrase sounding great with the C major triad on the C major 7 chord. The next phrase is really simple but also very effective. Let's see how lazy we can get. We're just trying to create a short phrase with a high note on either 1 and or 2 and. So why not use a scale melody, maybe with a leading note, just to spice it up a bit. Now the accent is easy enough, and you can of course move this around to other chords, but maybe the B half diminished is a little bit awkward. And here it's also easy to make a line with this short phrase. I'm adding a triplet on the G7 just for a bit of variation as well. And check out how this next one uses the F and the C version of the scale phrase, plus some of the previous 7th chord arpeggio tricks. First the scale phrase from F, and then of course the F major 7 arpeggio ascending, and having that accent on the 4 and. But that also leads us into the G7, which is now starting on the 5th, so. And then of course rounding it off with the resolution to C major 7, where you have the scale phrase from C. And I'm adding that A just to round it off in a nice way. Let's take a look at the most bebop sounding arpeggio, which of course also has some nice phrasing and an accent. You might know this from other videos that I made. Check out this melody. This is an F major 7 pivot arpeggio. It's a bebop superpower, and the term pivot arpeggio is something that I learned from Barry Harris.
And then we're gonna pivot. Maybe you ought to add a note.
It doesn't immediately look like an F major 7 arpeggio, because that would be. But the concept is that you play the first note, the F, and then you move the rest of the arpeggio down an octave, which gives you. And here it makes sense to get into some counterpoint rules, because after the ascending arpeggio, then you want to continue with a descending stepwise motion. So in this case, from E down to the D, which gives you that high note on 2 and an accent. And it's also just a beautiful melody and a great example of octave displacement. In fact, Barry Harris taught this exercise by playing first the normal arpeggio with that resolution, and then the pivot version, taking this through the scale. But in this video, we're trying to keep it easy or lazy. Just focus on the major 7 arpeggio, which is both the one that's used the most and also really easy to play if you do it like this on 2 adjacent strings. And this gives you some of the most melodic bebop lines. As you can tell, Barry Harris is a great place to level up your bebop and not only learn scales and arpeggios, but also learn how to turn that into beautiful vocabulary that you can use in your solos. And one of the most powerful things that he teaches, which has really transformed my playing and is also another shortcut for better phrasing, is how he adds chromatic passing notes to phrases. I talk about that in this video, and it's easily 100 times better than bebop scales, which I anyway really don't like. I'll explain why in the video. Check it out. Learn jazz, make music.